Welcome to Exploring the Role of AI in Education and the Workplace.
We are two classroom teachers on a mission to make artificial intelligence less intimidating and more inspiring to educators everywhere.
Whether you're just curious about what AI can do, or you're already experimenting with it in your classroom, this podcast is your space to explore, to learn, and to grow.
Each episode features a two-part format. First, we sit down with industry experts to unpack a key aspect of AI, from infrastructure and ethics to creativity and integration.
Then we bring it back to the classroom with a boots on the ground segment, real conversations with educators who are actively using AI with students.
We'll bring you practical insights, honest dialogue, and real-world examples to help you think critically and creatively about the role of AI in teaching and learning.
I'm Georgia Terlahi, a former K-5 instructional coach and an educator who's passionate about tech integration and sparking curiosity with students.
And I'm Jessica Pack, a middle school teacher, education author, and former California Teacher of the Year. My passion is creating compelling learning experiences.
So let's dive in and discover how AI can empower educators and transform classrooms, one episode at a time.
Today, we are so happy to have some incredible guests to talk about the infrastructure behind powering AI in education, or as we like to call it, behind the bot. We are joined by Amy Garner and Amanda Trumbull today. Thank you both so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your expertise with us. Could you maybe briefly introduce yourself and tell us the context where you work and how that might be germane to today's conversation? Amy, can we start with you?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. My name is Amy Garner. I'm the Vice President of Workforce Planning and Strategy at a hyperscale data center company called Vantage Data Centers. And what hyperscale data centers mean is we build really, really big data center facilities that are custom suit for what our customers need all across North America and, in fact, all across the globe. So my remit is specifically in North America, and what I do for the company is make sure that we understand what types of positions we're hiring, where, at what scale, and ensuring that we have workforce development programs across North America specifically to support those hiring efforts.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And Amanda?
Yeah, Amanda Trumbull. I'm the data center segment leader with ABB. And what that means, I'll start with explaining or unpacking ABB as best I can. So we're a global electrical equipment manufacturer, looking from medium voltage gear, from utility really level all the way through distribution. So to explain that further, anything that's coming off of the transmission line from a power perspective, and then stepping into the data center and continuing to step down that power until it gets to the rack that holds the compute and servers that Vantage would host for various customers. And we provide the power infrastructure to allow that, to enable those servers to operate the way that they need to from a very high level. And some of those products look like, from a component level, breakers, and then from a product level, it'd be medium voltage gear, power distribution units, uninterruptible power supplies, just various different levels of the equipment level stack, I should say, getting to the rack without trying to get overly complicated here, but just a lot of electrical distribution equipment. And my position within the org is to cover the data center segment, that vertical, and make sure that our portfolio aligns with the needs and continuing evolving equipment infrastructure that these data centers are using to be able to facilitate and run efficiently.
Thank you so much for being here today. Jessica and I are both classroom teachers. We're in school buildings a lot, and we talk about AI with lots of people, but we never get to pull up the curtain and talk about what actually powers the AI. So we're very excited for this conversation today. So to start off with, what are some of the jobs that data centers will create that do not exist today?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. So, one of the things that is very true is while Vantage Data Centers, for example, builds hyperscale facilities, aka really, really big data centers, which oftentimes house AI applications, whether that's the home or processing space for a large language model, for example, we are not necessarily AI experts across the business, right? So, like for me, for example, I'm a human resources professional. I've been in the HR space for 20 years. That doesn't mean that just because I work at a data center company, I know everything there is to know about AI. So, one of the very, I think, interesting and fun things that we're doing is learning how to embrace the tools that we operate and make available through our data centers, and we're doing that ourselves. So we are in the process of hiring AI navigators, for example, right now. That's a job that's never existed in any company that I've ever worked at before. And those are folks that we would effectively consider early adopters that know and understand how to use AI agents that are coming in to teach the novices among us how to more effectively do our jobs using those tools available today. The other thing that I think is really interesting to think about when we think about the growth of data centers across the globe, across the United States, however you want to look at that, is while we might be hiring some of the same positions, so we're going to hire electricians in every single data center that we build, we're going to hire mechanics in every data center that we build, because there's really technical equipment that you have to know how to operate and maintenance, just like you would have your car engine maintenance. You got to maintenance the motor in a generator, but we're doing that at scale. And sometimes what happens is we trade scope for scale, just like any other company, right? So in the past, in a lot of data center environments, we would hire what we call critical facilities technicians or data center engineers. And those folks would need to have some technical skill coming into that job, where they might know something about plumbing or they might know something about being an electrician, and then they learn other things where they become kind of the Jacks and Jills of all trades within that environment. And when something happens, they're the people that come to help. One of the things that's happening in our large scale facilities is we are actually embracing that opportunity to focus. So for folks that may, be super interested specifically in the mechanical operation of motors, we actually are employing now generator specialists. Whereas in the past, you've been expected to take those mechanical skills and learn other things. We now have the opportunity for specialization within a variety of fields. So those are some of the things that we're doing at very rapid rates. So, for example, Vantage Data Centers hired over 500 people last year just in North America, and we're going to do that again this year. So it's not just the new jobs, but it's also the bulk of positions that we're hiring across the country and across the globe.
I'm still shocked to hear that you guys were able to hire 500 people in North America. Amy, that's really impressive. Like, hang your hat on that. That's very exciting. We're in a similar uptick from a resource perspective, but that's something to model against. So something that is obviously a huge topic around how much power are consumed by data centers. The data centers are looking at various energy sources right now to be able to tap in and kind of supplement what they're taking from the utility. And so they're looking at battery energy storage systems. Natural gas has some potential, solar, hydrogen, even potential small reactors to have different sources of energy. And one new position that will come from that will be an on-site microgrid operator. So that individual will be responsible to kind of oversee where they're drawing electricity from or how they're producing electricity at any given time, and following maybe the peaks that the utility is seeing and when they can be islanded and when they can manage their own electricity use, and then kind of following up with the reporting metrics on that, because they are, heavily criticized and regulated, and will be able to kind of pinpoint and give more data points back to the larger uh, population as to where these energy sources are actually coming from, and how they're utilizing them more efficiently. So I think that's a pretty cool one. Everyone wants to lean towards green alternatives, and this would be a very unique niche position to be the on-site microgrid operator within a data center. And I see that as a very succinct like position of the future. I love like some of the AI, what I would say like fusion or interface roles that Amy was just talking about. Like we don't necessarily sit with the AI experts either. We're all still learning about how to best leverage AI even within the large conglomerate that is ABB. And the having that orchestrator, that person who's managing the workloads and just figuring out how to apply it and what makes the most sense is a pretty cool position to be in, to just say like I'm using these tools to make our lives more efficient. I wish I had that in my personal life because I know that it's there and I know it can get better. But yeah. And then so small or unique feature, I guess, I don't know, unique piece of information. My husband is a service tech for ABB also. He starts up STSs and PDUs at a lot of data centers. And so I get to have like a firsthand experience as to what he's seeing in terms of new roles and new technologies and new rollouts within the data center space. And there's potential for, so the power and cooling side is kind of where I see the microgrid operator, like I mentioned, but then there's a cooling and environmental piece too to data centers. Huge, very cooling is a huge impact on how data centers operate. And there's something that he mentioned around like a climate adaptation planner, which is pretty unique. And I haven't quite seen how that actually plays out, but it's just them trying to utilize like the data centers here locally to me in West Des Moines. They're not air conditioned. They're all just run on liquid cooling or like the closed loop systems. And as that technology continues to expand and they start to do more cooling at the rack level, where they actually have water running through the servers and some type of liquid immersion technology, it's going to just continue down the trajectory of how the climate impacts where these data centers live. But I mean, we're already seeing some deploy in the north or non-traditional locations because they're going to use the cold climate that already exists there too. So it's really interesting to see the due diligence that goes into some of the locations as to where these places can land from infrastructure perspective, efficiency perspective. And I think that those will become more carved out roles instead of like, just additional work for someone who's already probably really got a full plate. So that was kind of a lot, but there's a lot of new potential things that on the horizon for sure.
This is already such a great conversation just for me personally, because they're talking about building a data center in the city one over from me. And Georgia and I happen to live in the Southern California desert. So that's something that we've been curious about, was how cooling would be a good idea in the middle of the desert where we have 120 degrees in August. So this is very interesting so far. You spoke, both of you, a little bit about specialization, but we're wondering, how are you and your colleagues supporting workforce development in such a rapidly developing space? Amanda, could we start with you?
Sure thing. Yep. No, I went direct to our services team because similar to what kind of Amy expressed from adding all those resources that they were able to, we, from a services perspective, we have a similar, so no, it's no secret. There's a lot of demand and a lot of growth in this space in terms of how much electrical infrastructure data centers have been buying because they need to fulfill some of these construction plans that they have and make some of these sites actually happen. So to realize that we need resources in the field to be able to do startups on more equipment in parallel, if you will, like with multiple projects running at the same time. So before we might have deployed like a certain team to one project and then that team would go to another project, but we need to be onboarding in ways that we can be running half a dozen projects simultaneously for potentially one customer, and then continue to have that level of growth, because that's the order in which a lot of these have equipment purchases have been made. So now we need to be able to fulfill the startups and other service commitments that sit along with that. So our services team has one overarching initiative in place, and that is simply to improve the customer experience, or to make the customer experience remarkable, I think is actually their like tagline. So that's encouraging to know that we're still being thoughtful about what our customers are going to experience while they're going through this tremendous period of growth. And then what does that mean? So it's high. We're trying to go from, let's say, yeah, I don't know the exact number, but we had 100 technicians in a certain region today, and we're taking that to 400 by the end of the year. So leveraging the growth there is it's its own criteria, I would say. So they're hiring experienced technicians to kind of support some of that existing um the need. But then in addition, they're expanding our early career program to develop new talent, which is something we haven't really tapped into before. So I thought that that was like encouraging to hear, because I haven't seen a ton of visibility into an early career program from a services perspective. We have kind of like discovery and rotational programs on more the commercial and technical side to where they can get involved, but not necessarily out in the services team. So that was really encouraging to hear. And then, of course, just different types of recruitment and involvement at the community level to understand how we can get maybe more grassroots efforts to make sure that folks are, it goes all together all at once, educated about what's actually happening within a data center, educated locally on what jobs and potential it could bring to their area, and then like how it would impact the workforce.
Thank you so much. Amy, can we go over to you as well? Same question about supporting workforce development.
Yeah, thank you. Similar to what Amanda mentioned, we're trying to be good stewards of the communities in which we operate. And I look at that at a couple of levels. Number one, I'm asking people to come work for an organization and trust us, not only to be good stewards of their career, but also of their families, their lives around, them in their communities. And so I kind of look at workforce development in three ways. Number one, for employees that are already here at Vantage, right? So we have an obligation. We have a very keen interest in making sure that our current employees know what opportunities are available to them, have learning pathways, and can say, hey, I might be in accounting today, but I'm interested in operations tomorrow. So that's a very real thing for us. Making sure that our employees understand and know the career pathways that are available to them. We also look at, as I mentioned earlier, being good stewards of the communities in which we operate. That means making sure that people know and understand what we're doing and what building a data center means in their community. We often look at making sure we're hiring local first. We want humans who are already in close proximity to the space and know and understand the communities where those data centers are being built to have a pathway into our business. We often work with unions across the country to make sure that we've got partnerships in place. And we hire pathways through standard traditional recruiting paths. We recruit a lot of veterans into the data center space. But really where the rubber meets the road, and I think what's really interesting for educators and students alike, is these partnerships that data centers and other industries have really done a good job of creating over time, where we're creating new pathways. And effectively, I look at my job as either to create new pathways or remove barriers to existing pathways for humans to come work at Vantage data centers. And one of the things I'm really proud of is specifically at a project that is a very large project that we're doing in Port Washington, Wisconsin. We are going to build a data center campus that has 4 buildings, and we typically measure things by power consumption. That campus will deliver over 900 megawatts of IT capacity. It's really, really big. And we've engaged in direct investment and K through 12 partnerships. So, for example, we just announced last week in partnership with our customer at that location, so Oracle and OpenAI, along with Vantage Data Centers, donated $225,000 to revitalize the Port Washington Soxville District Education Foundation. And one of the other things so there are partnerships like that that are really exciting. And then one of the other things that we look at is creating new pathways for people that don't even know what a data center is or the skills that are required to work at a data center. So we have a partnership with an organization called Big Step, where the folks that go through that program are learning apprenticeship to career style skill building. And those folks may or may not end up working at Vantage data centers. They may end up working at a general contractor in a skilled trade on the construction side of the house that, we are engaging in those pathways so that we are making sure that there are opportunities for a variety of ways for folks to engage with these large scale developments. And then I would say the other thing that is really exciting is curricula co-creation. So we've had the opportunity to actually work directly with educators to talk about what sort of programs they are already looking at. We've worked with some technical colleges in areas where we are building that we've taken their already existing curricula and said, you know what, if you tweak this or you change this here, that actually would create some understanding and a little bit of a softer entry into a data center career. So those are the types of things that we're looking at Vantage and certainly are open to continuing to round out the set of partnerships that we have across the country for sure.
Amy, that was awesome. I just for my own personal comments, like I'm learning so much too, and it's so great to hear that like you're able to do that with your tenants also. That OpenAI and Oracle were willing to do like a joint publication or joint announcement. That's really impressive.
Yeah, I think the projects that we're doing with Oracle and OpenAI honestly have gotten a degree of um, notoriety and attention because they are such large scale projects. But it's really incredible to see the net effect, and those organizations are going to have talent communities and their own employees that are out, prolificating the message about what they're building. So it just really amplifies um, the opportunity to ensure that people know that these jobs even exist, right? Like, I mean, I've worked in the data center industry for 13 years. I didn't know what a data center was before I started working at one, right? And I didn't even know what a data center was when the woman who initially recruited me to the industry said, "Hey, can you come work at this company?" I was like, "Sure, what do you do?" So I think there's, just an opportunity for that net effect of people to learn about what we're doing, which is really cool.
So that's actually a great segue into maybe where we should slow down for a hot second and make sure that everyone does understand how data centers, cloud computing, and servers all work together to enable AI tools. We're coming from the lens of schools, so we're hoping that you both could give us some insight on how those pieces fit together. Amy, could we start with you?
Sure. So I'll preface this with saying that I am not an engineer, right? So I am a human resources professional. I've had the distinct pleasure and honor of being in the data center industry for 13 years. And what I'll say is this, anytime you are working on your phone, anytime you're working on your computer, you don't know it, but you're interacting with the data center. So anything that requires compute power, storage, reliable network connection, that is most likely traffic, network traffic that is flowing through a data center. So most AI tools actually rely on cloud compute and the processing power that can only be found in a large scale data center. It doesn't necessarily mean that AI only exists in data centers or that the cloud only exists in data centers. But what a data center is a convergence of networks where we have a space for data to be stored, for those networks to interact with that data, and processing to occur. So the AI tools that we use on a day-to-day basis are pulling right from information. When I go into ChatGPT, for example, or I go into Copilot, for example, I go into Gemini, for example, those large language models are accessing information all across the internet. And so when they are accessing that information, that processing has to occur, and that occurs on servers in a data center. And most folks honestly never know that they're driving by a data center, or, like my mom, for example, says, oh, the cloud, Amy works in the cloud. The cloud's up, not up there. It's on a server in a data center, right? But the way I think about how we interact with these facilities is, I didn't know what a data center was when I first started working in an organization, but what I do know is I was raised in South Louisiana. I left South Louisiana 2 months before Hurricane Katrina hit, and I didn't talk to my mom for 18 days after Hurricane Katrina hit. I didn't know if she was alive. I didn't know if she was not. What I knew is that folks from the Weather Channel were talking about the mass devastation of my hometown. And eventually, what happened is I was able to communicate with my mom through the OnStar phone in my roommate's car with the OnStar phone in her car. And that type of technology does not exist without data centers, because every time you interact with a cloud-based application, which just means that the company that's giving you the application isn't necessarily an expert at storing that data. So they store that data in the cloud, aka a data center. So anytime we interact with technology, we are most likely accessing information that is traveling on a network that passed through a data center. And in a data center, we have racks that store servers. Those servers store data. And so when we think about how we are enabling AI, how we are enabling cloud, the data centers that we build and operate are effectively the convergence of storage and processing and how you get your data.
That's such a great explanation. And honestly, like as the words data center just even become part of the public lexicon, I think that that's really beneficial for just, average teachers like us to be able to understand that flow and why it's so very important. Amanda, anything to add to the topic of data centers, cloud computing, and how all that could impact schools?
Oh, I'm still shaking off my goosebumps from your story about Katrina, Amy. That was really touching, and it's crazy to think about what you lose when you can't communicate. It's really wild, and then to have it be the OnStar connection to bring you back down. That's pretty wild to think about. Um, no, so you summarized it amazingly. It's yeah, the physical infrastructure of the internet or of the cloud sits in a data center, and the way that I think it's really important back to schools too is it also allows, because it's all of the networks coming together and giving the amount of processing needed for like large scale multiple users, you can have 30 folks within a class log into the same application without needing extremely expensive hardware sitting in your schools. It's because it's done through a cloud-based application. So like in terms of access and more personalized learning, those tools are available because you can have multiple people logging into the same thing at the same time, like updating a G, updating any sort of live document and sharing it instantaneously, or using any type of program or platform that you would decide to stream, or streaming games, for example. I mean, all of that is run back through very specific data halls and possible because the physical infrastructure sits behind the cloud.
I know we always hear a lot of media about how much energy data centers actually consume, but what are those impacts, and how should educators be talking to their students about that? What are things that the students and the educators should know about energy and environmental implications?
The way I see it, I think it's really great that people are asking questions, because I don't think that data centers have done a great job of expressing or being transparent historically about what we were doing or what they were doing per se. And it wasn't because it wasn't for any particular reason. It was just they didn't do a great job about explaining what they are coming to the neighborhoods and doing. So I think it's awesome to wonder, because yeah, if there's all of this press that you're seeing, like I don't know what they're saying about the data center that might come close to the one that you mentioned where you live. But I'm sure it has to do with water usage, power consumption. Your utility rates are going to go up, your water rates are going to go up, and everyone's going to point their fingers back towards the data hall. And it's very convenient to do that, but it's not necessarily accurate. And so um, there are really good questions and really good um, ways that we can kind of start to position. I mean, for lack of a better word, I think they need a drink milk campaign, number one, to be able to start to inform at some level, on a higher level, about really what data centers are. And that it has to be relative though too, because we can be very transparent in terms of how much water usage. I can speak very familiar or very freely about Des Moines because Microsoft has a bunch of campuses here. It's no secret. Microsoft is very transparent and will share their water usage every year on our local news channels. And it'll say, they're the 11th largest water usage user in the greater metro area. But when you look at like who they're behind, you start to kind of scratch your head because it's like, well, why is Wells Fargo, for example, using more water than Microsoft? Well, because Wells has a ton of properties and it takes more water to simply water the grass than it does to run and operate a high power compute data center. And I don't want to be like in the position of comparing, because another thing about my husband is he's a huge golfer. And if we were going to compare about water usage and I brought up golf courses, he would like shun me. So I didn't just do that. But no, I'm just saying it's all relative, like we have to put it into terms of where someone said that a 300 megawatt facility would use the same amount of water in a year as an In-N-Out burger. And I don't think that anybody's freaking out about In-N-Out burgers coming to their neighborhoods, but we haven't actually heard it in those terms. So I feel like educating around relativity and showing transparency, but not being overly transparent when they don't have something to compare it to. Because if I saw the number of millions of gallons of water usage that data centers do use, yes, it is a very startling number. But until you understand how much businesses in general use from a water usage perspective, you don't have anything to compare it to, and you can't make it, you can't rationalize it in just seeing the those bright lights.
You gave really like a concrete thing I think kids could understand. And like bringing up golf courses, we live in Palm Springs, and so golf courses are everywhere. So I imagine if they did water comparison between the data center and our golf courses, people would be astounded because they definitely use way more water than anything. So no, I think that was a great comparison. Amy, did you have anything to add?
Sure. First of all, I'll just say thank you, Amanda, for the notion that, it is all relative. And part of what I think about is, we all need to be good humans. We all need to think about the impact that we make in the world and how we are effectively using the resources that we have available to us, whether that's water, whether that's power, whether that's data. Right. So I think there are a lot of data center companies, to Amanda's point, that have not necessarily been transparent about what they're doing because they weren't necessarily able to do that. Right. Because, for example, Vantage Data Centers is going to build a data center that we own and we operate, but we're building that for a customer. So that customer gets to say, yeah, you can talk about that, or no, you can't. Right. And we can talk about some of the larger scale projects that we work on, particularly this data center that we're building, or the campus rather that we're building that we call our Lighthouse campus in Port Washington, Wisconsin, because our customer has allowed us to talk openly and honestly about that, and that's been publicly disclosed information. So at that campus, for example, to offer another point of comparison there, we have a closed loop water system. So what that means is we will put water in a pipe and that will continue to run to ensure that the data center space stays cool so that those servers don't overheat. Just like when you're working with your laptop on your lap and your laptop gets hot, we don't want those server cards getting hot. But in all of our data centers at Vantage, we use closed loop systems. So that doesn't mean we're just constantly pumping water in to provide evaporative cooling. That's like technology days of old. We don't do that at Vantage. We use closed loop systems. And for example, at this project in Port Washington, Wisconsin, we'll use 22,000 gallons of water a day, which is about what 65 homes would use. And we use that as much for the data center as we do for bathrooms and cleaning, right? So it's not just about the way that the equipment needs to be maintained and cooled, but it's also that this is a business where we do have grass, we have bathrooms, and we want people to be able to fix their lunch. But at that project, we actually will achieve water positivity because we are making restoration commitments in that community, and so that's an environment where Vantage is going to come in and not take from local resources, but add to. And I think that's really it's a really important point to think about understanding what's happening in your community. And this is why we say, as an industry, data centers really are trying to be more transparent about what's happening, what impacts we're going to have in the community, and we want to have conversations about it, right? We want people to know and understand that we're coming, because we also want to talk about the job opportunities and what that data center is going to be able to do in terms of long-term impact in that environment.
You just made me think of what Microsoft has done here locally too, and I would be amiss if I didn't mention it. So they brought in the water tower in the next town over, which essentially put the local economic development plans 30 years ahead of schedule and allowed us to bring in a large amount of new residential development. And then they put a underground reservoir in just 6 months ago, and they do this massive infrastructure investment so that they can offset and support their interest, obviously, but then they give it back to the village or give it back to the town. So it's the municipality's now resource and asset that they didn't have to pay for, and it makes a ton of the local um, development committees, they're just floored, and they love those kind of discussions because they didn't think that they would ever see this type of investment in terms of where their financial planning was routed for a fixed number for however long, and now they're being able to advance in so many different areas just because we've had the support of these large data centers coming in and giving a ton of infrastructure, and then not to mention the offset that they bring in taxes too. I mean, we don't even need to get into that, but it's very significant.
Yeah, I just thank you, Amanda, for saying that. And I'll say that there are similar advancements around what we're doing for power, right? We talk about data centers typically in the relative sense of how much power they consume. That's how much power they have the capacity at max to consume. We're not necessarily consuming that all day, every second of every day, but we do have the capacity to do that. And for example, at this project in Wisconsin, we will actually develop over 2 gigawatts of renewable energy. And so that includes wind, that includes solar, and 30% of that is actually going to be given back to the local community. So there are a lot of those stories, right? Where, and we are partnering with our customers in order to be able to do that. There are a lot of these stories that Amanda made a good point that as an industry, we just haven't been, we've been doing a lot of these things, and it behooves us to be good stewards of the resources that we use, right? Because we're not coming into a community thinking about, oh, we got to build a data center that, is going to do this one thing this one time. We are making investments in infrastructure and very expensive equipment to last for generations. That's good for us as a business, right? We want that longevity of being able to operate and to generate income for our investors in the long run. But we also want to make sure that we're doing that in ways that positively impact the communities in which we operate, because that it is a cycle, right? We want people in the community to know and understand what we're doing, that we want them to come work for us, right? We want to hire locally. And being a good steward of the community is part of that cyclical exchange, I think. And the only other thing I'll say about that is, again, I think it's absolutely fair for educators, for students to go, hey, I don't know. And what I would encourage you is ask, right? That if you don't know, ask. People can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. There are your local legislators are probably talking to any developers that are coming to your community. They will probably know. I just was at a conference 2 weeks ago and heard multiple folks, for example, from Northern Virginia. There are multiple counties in Northern Virginia where data center development has been happening quite extensively for the last 20 years with Vantage as a developer there as well. And they talk openly about the cuts in rates and taxpayer benefits um, that have benefited those communities. And those are the types of stories that I think people don't necessarily hear. But please ask. It's okay. Do a school project. Call somebody at go knock on a door. Back. It's okay to ask.
This is such a great conversation on so many levels because it really underscores how every different facet of the AI evolution is just, working hard to pedal along and make changes and be more sustainable and learn more. And I think that, just bottom line of be curious and ask, that's such a great rule for the road moving forward for sure. I know that none of us are able to see into the future, but I am wondering if there are any innovations or breakthroughs on the horizon that you're excited about that could make AI infrastructure more efficient or accessible, sustainable. Just what are your thoughts on what's coming soon?
One of the things that's both the benefit and a responsibility of how we think about AI as our industry uses AI and as our industry builds data centers that allow AI to operate is like many organizations, we are looking at ways that we can be efficient. We are thinking about our power consumption and the way um, that we shift workloads within the facility. And that's the type of big data that it would take years for a human to look through, right? And so we can use AI models to help us better understand how our equipment is operating within our own facilities. And that creates opportunity not only, as we were talking about earlier, for new jobs and for people to understand and interact with these AI models in different ways, but it also creates opportunity for us to operate more effectively and efficiently as a business. It behooves us to ensure that we are using the resources that we use on a regular basis in a way that makes sense not only for us as a for-profit organization, but also as humans. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about from an AI perspective is when we can transfer things like understanding site efficiency and the distribution of power and the most effective way that we can do that, we create opportunity for safety. We create the opportunity for the equipment to tell us that something bad is going to happen before something bad happens, which ultimately saves resources in the long run, right? We also create the opportunity for humans to interact with that equipment in a safer way. So those are some of the things that we're really excited about. The other thing that I would say just from a personal perspective is, my hope and dream is that one day kids are sitting around at the dinner table with their parents saying what we've been saying for years, right? I want to be a doctor, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a data center operator because this is one of the coolest things that you can do to help bring services to your community and to help prolificate the digital foundation for a thriving world. What we do is provide that digital foundation. The consumption of data has not slowed down, right? And we don't anticipate that it's going to slow down. But what we can do is think effectively about the way we consume that data, train AI models to help us do that more effectively so that we can actually spend more time with each other as human beings, right? What AI is not going to replace is the human interaction. So when I'm talking about, kids sitting down at the table, hopefully that means every child has a human that is present and stable in their lives and that person can pay attention to those children because other stuff is being taken care of more effectively. I don't have to worry about figuring out the schedule because my AI tool did that. I don't have to worry about, making sure that everybody's got travel plans for the holidays because I can use an agent to help me do that. But what we're not going to be able to replace is that connective tissue of what allows us to be human. And my view, as I stated earlier, is that technology allows us to do that more meaningfully. And as at Vantage, as we build the digital foundation for a thriving world, I like to focus on that thriving part. We thrive as humans, and we thrive as humans connected together.
Well said. That's a tough act to follow, Amy. Geez Louise. Oh, I very impressive. I'll share a couple comments if that's all right. Yeah, so really just tying it into all the different points that Amy touched on. It is, we, from a infrastructure, from a manufacturing perspective, we see it, the demand, as an opportunity to improve long-term infrastructure at scale. So it's not necessarily a problem. It's going back to, like, we can be more transparent. We can do this better. We can make products that are going to be more efficient. And it's our responsibility to figure out what the next most efficient design is to make data centers like the forefront, even though they kind of already have been in terms of how they're regulated and how their energy use is measured, but to take it even to another level, so that we can start to have real data points to go back to show what energy savings and what how we're giving it back to the grid, and just all other ways that the energy we're using can actually be managed appropriately and then shared in a proper manner. So ABB right now is rethinking, because of the additional compute that AI brings to the rack, and the more densification that compute requires, essentially. We're revisiting our portfolio and kind of having like a fundamental shift in some of our development. So we put 40% of our R&D into data centers, specifically into updated data center design, and we're moving from AC architecture to a DC architecture, which just in terms of how that becomes more efficient, it's 7% reduction in copper, so starting to save some like commodities and resources from that perspective. But then it has less conversions, less power conversions, and less power conversions is less wasted energy. It moves the power closer to the rack, and we're looking at a solid state transformer, which would potentially unlock the ability to bring that power in and maintain the power at DC rated power instead of AC, which has been said to shave peak load numbers by up to like 30%, which is really high. And I don't have the actual data behind that in front of me today, but it's kind of the way the future is, and ABB is 100% behind that transition and putting their R&D into products that will support that transition. So without getting too technical, I loved all the human aspects that Amy brought out of it, but there are real physical deliverables on our gear side that we're able to bring that are more efficient and will help the energy transition move forward at more palatable, or I mean, it'll just allow the technology to happen, really.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, both of you, today. We have really appreciated the conversation, and of course, we've learned so much. Before we let you go, would you mind sharing where listeners could reach out to you if they are interested in connecting or continuing the conversation? Amanda, could we start with you? Awesome. Thank you. And Amy?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Please find me on LinkedIn. It's Amy M. Garner on LinkedIn. And you are more than welcome to email me any thoughts, questions about communities in which we operate. My email address is amy.garner, GARNER, at Vantage, VANTAGE -DC.com.
Perfect. Thank you again. We appreciate your time and your expertise.
Now that we've heard from the experts, it's time to take it to the classroom.
This is our Boots on the Ground segment, where we talk with real educators doing the real work with AI right alongside their students.
Let's hear how AI is making a difference in schools today. We have two amazing educator guests joining us today, Cami Cannikins and Adam Gary.
Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate you being here.
Could you briefly introduce yourself and explain the educational context in which you work?
Sure. So my name is Cami Cannikins, and I have a couple different hats. In my day job, I work as a district instructional lead in a rural district in southern Alberta in Canada. So right above, literally right above Montana. And so I'm kind of the everything coach, including lots of AI lead in that role. I also teach a course for pre-service teachers on education technology. And so, of course, we talk about AI there. And then I also have a passion project, I guess we could call it, where I have a podcast called Classrooms Beyond Borders. And in that podcast, I talk to educators from low and middle income countries all over the world about what it's like to teach or be an educator in other places that aren't necessarily a Western, North American, European type of school. And so we talk about education, but also AI and technology. And so I've had lots of great discussions about that world as well.
And Adam, could you introduce yourself?
So I'm Adam Gary. I'm a former elementary school teacher. When I left the classroom, I was involved with project-based learning and technology integration, professional development for teachers and school leaders. Then I made my way over to Dell. I led education strategy for North America for K-12 and high ed. And over the last 2 years, I'm actually coming up on my anniversary. I've been helping school districts across the US and Canada actually integrate generative AI into the system, but starting at that district level so that teachers down at the classroom have everything they need to do this in a way that's safe and secure, but brings about creativity, curiosity, and innovation.
Fantastic. Thank you both for contributing your expertise to this conversation. In the first half of the episode, we heard from industry experts about AI infrastructure, like data centers, cloud computing, energy consumption. And what we'd like to talk to you about is how should that sort of shape educators' perception of the tools that they're using in the classroom? Adam, could we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. What I think is super important is that as part of the AI literacy journey for teachers, I'm always kind of teaching them that this isn't magic. And within that context, they understand how the technology works. And, there's a reason why there's, 5 or 6 companies that are leading the LLM revolution, because with the scaling laws, you need a lot of data, right? And then you need a lot of compute. And that creates giant server rooms, right? And resource rooms that use a lot of electricity and a lot of water, right? And at the teacher level, what I usually get is questions around that idea about the environment, right? And teaching them that as they train and when inference happens, so after training happens, that they realize that that's where most of that environmental impact is being felt. And that whatever we can do at that classroom level to educate kids as part of their AI literacy journey, it's going to be super important, because this is really a cloud computing kind of revolution in this stuff. And the resources that they're going to use are going to seem free, right? Because they're going to be Enterprise Gemini, Enterprise Copilot, but it's sort of free as in puppies, because there's cost to everything we do in this environment right now.
Thank you. And Cami?
Well, and while in my role, we don't necessarily talk about the big data structures so much, we do talk about how, right, there's a couple companies that are behind everything. And we like to talk about, yes, these tools seem free, especially if we're using them in the free version, but that means that we are the product, right? So our data, our information, what we do, we are the product. They're using us for their tools. And so that's an interesting place to start, and to help teachers and students be aware of that. So of course, we want to teach privacy and data safety, and really help teachers and students be aware of what they're putting into AI systems, because they don't necessarily, students are so used to being on social media and all those places where they tell their life, they tell their world. And those are often things that we probably might not want to encourage going into AI chatbots. So that part is certainly, just that idea that there's you are the product, and we have to help students and teachers be aware of the information that they're putting in there.
Can I just add something based on what Cami said? Like the other thing I've been doing really over the last month or so, there was a statistic, y'all might have seen this, that there was an increase over the last 18 months of 212% of people using ChatGPT for news. And the reason why that's significant is because over time, it will change the whole infrastructure of the web. So to Cami's point, like if a website no longer can get money from advertising because no one's going there, how do we monetize this moving forward? That's going to change, and it's going to change rapidly. And what is that going to look like? And if people don't understand the infrastructure of the web and how that works, then they might not realize how their information is going to be used.
I would jump in and say we're also, looking at this actually from a very Western centric lens as well. And, I have lots of other thoughts on what infrastructure looks like in other parts of the world, but that'll probably come later. But, even this conversation that we're having is quite wealthy world, Western centric here.
Thank you, Kemi, for bringing that up. That's you are correct, and we will talk about that shortly. But Adam, back to you. I know you work with districts all over the country. Do you think most educational leaders fully understand the infrastructure demands of AI? And second part is, how can teachers advocate for better support of resources?
So on the infrastructure side, I don't think leaders have really understood that, especially outside of the tech department. But as they're learning more about the tools, because they're being, asked to implement and use these tools, they're starting to ask more questions. For example, there's a lot of folks who are now saying to school districts, like, we have this model, but it's a token-based model. And they're going, what does that mean? And then I'm saying, well, as a school district leader, you have finite budgets. You have very few opportunities to raise money outside of grants, right? A token-based model does not work for a school district because you need to know what is the cost per user per month or per year so that I can work that into my budget. So this idea of infrastructure and what it takes from a generative AI standpoint is starting to show up, especially because most of these companies don't really know what to charge, right? Because they don't have enough data on usage to be able to say, how do we make money here? So they're either overcharging or undercharging, right? And so people are still trying to figure it out. That's why I believe that this idea of AI literacy and teaching district leaders what questions they should be asking during that process is really important. So like, what LLM are you using? Is it an open source LLM? Because if it is, then you have to set up that infrastructure that tells them that they know that there can be a pricing structure that works for them, rather than saying they have an API going to OpenAI, which then says, it's sort of fluid, right? And, that's not easy to teach district leaders who usually don't play in those kinds of conversations, but it is an important thing for them to start to think about. And on the teacher resource side, I am a firm believer that we need to empower the teacher. So what I've been helping school systems with is, how do you create that checklist that allows a teacher to at least go through the motions and decide, is this the right resource? Should I be using it? So for example, the first question is always, is this asking for personal identifiable information? If so, there's a giant hand that says stop. We need to go to district process, right? Second, do we already have a resource that does this? Here, click here, because we might already have something. And then lastly, there's 3 questions, right, that are all related to instruction that the teacher could go through. And if they're like, yeah, this is good, then they should be allowed to use it within those confines. But that's the way I've been advocating for teachers, because we do need to empower them at the classroom level.
And I would suggest too, within all of that, one of the things that I'm really advocating against, especially with my pre-service teachers, but all teachers, is we as teachers, we get that, ooh, look at how fast AI made that multiple choice quiz, or look at how fast AI made that worksheet. And that just kills me inside, because we shouldn't be thinking AI is this great solution to do old things faster. And so one of the spaces that I'm really working in, across Canada and my district and all the places, is helping teachers to see, we need to use AI to amplify what we're doing, to take the grunt work away, the research, the worksheet, and get to places where we couldn't before with student work, just because maybe that research part or some of that back end took so much time. What can we do if we really dig into what these tools can do for us in ways that weren't even possible before? And so it's actually hard to take the lid off of that can and get teachers to think in those ways when we're so used to worksheet, reading, quiz. So, when we think about resources, that's also not just, making old style resources faster, but how do we really leverage AI to make the world of education more personalized, whether that's feedback or interests or all sorts of things like that.
Yeah. So Kimmy, I agree with you, but I would say it's not just on the teacher. There's like many things that fall into that environment, right? So I was at ISTE and almost every booth was the things you just said. There weren't a lot of booths that are like, we're going to be completely innovative and let's show you how to build performance tasks and get to more project-based environments, right? They were all like, let's show you how quickly you can create a worksheet and a formative assessment. And so first off, we need to get the vendor community to rethink, what are they talking to school systems about? And then you're right, at the system level, we need to be rethinking, what are we asking to happen at the classroom level? Because the same questions about the outsiders you've been using for 20 years, that doesn't fly anymore, right?
Or it shouldn't. And how do we make that? Just because you can generate 50 questions or 100 questions about the Outsiders novel really, really quickly doesn't mean that they're quality even. And that's part of the other part of, this whole piece, is that because it's so quick, because it's so easy, even though part of good AI literacy says, whether you use an 80-20 rule or whatever, you must check, you must put your human in the loop, you must put your teacher's eyes on things. So many teachers just skip that, and they're putting out, questions about a novel, historical figures, novels that are inaccurate and have inaccuracies, and that part, how do we get the world, teachers, other people to say, no, we still need to really, have our human brains in this loop.
Yeah, I'm coining a new term, human in the learning, not just human in the loop, because at some point the teacher creates the worksheet, gives it to the kid goes to ChatGPT, uploads it, and no human is in the learning process at all. It's just all AI, right?
And I think that's why this is such an interesting transition period in education in general, is having these conversations about redefining what learning looks like, what teaching looks like, and how all those pieces can work together with that layer of artificial intelligence. Some of the experts that we had talked to mentioned rural and underfunded schools being left behind due to infrastructure gaps. Cami, I know you have a podcast profiling teachers in remote areas of the world. What have you learned about this kind of digital divide, sort of from a global perspective?
Well, that is such an interesting question, because, again, with our Western lens, when we think of using the internet or AI, we think of people sitting down at a computer or kids at a Chromebook, and we assume that the school has internet and that there's connection, and that's just part of what we take for granted. Now, I know there are places in the United States and in Canada where students might go home to an area, a rural area, where their particular place, their home on their mountain or their valley, doesn't have internet access, right? They don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have cellular service. But for the most part, our kids are then going to schools where internet access exists. When we go to places in rural South America, rural Africa, and even in African major centers, capital cities in Africa even, the infrastructure changes a lot. When I talk to teachers from these areas, there's some things that are just so apparent across these teachers about their infrastructure. So first of all, computers in schools are almost non-existent. And so lots of teachers, I might talk to a teacher and there's 800 students at the school, and there might be 4 or 5 laptops, and those are personal teacher laptops, but that's all that the school has. And so the teachers borrow those laptops to do some work, and there is no internet access at that school. So this is like best case scenario. So to use those computers, the teachers have to hotspot to their phone. Now, typically in many of those nations, whether, India, Africa, buying mobile service is quite reasonable. and they do have smartphones that they can access, but not computers. So even internet, at most schools, I'm talking, schools where national children go, not where the children of internationals, not international schools with international white kids, but real schools with people from the country. Most of those schools in so many countries, low and middle income countries, do not have internet access for that school. So that means, for example, if there are computers, like if there's a little computer lab, those are all probably old secondhand desktops, laptops, and none of them have internet connections. So the kids are typing in, or they're using an old version of Microsoft to do a PowerPoint or to type in Word or to make a spreadsheet. And that's what their computer training is for students, because again, there's just no internet access. Now, smartphones are certainly incredibly different. Here's an interesting statistic. Up until about the cell phone area, so let's think about the early 2000s, in Africa, 96% of Africans did not have telephone service. They did not have a landline. So there was no communication other than walking, right? Or physically getting a message. So when cellular service comes online in Africa, that changes things immensely. In North America, we've had landlines, we've had telephone communication, but in Africa, that changed everything. So when I was there early on in the 2000s, they were texting much sooner because it was a cheap and easy way to communicate. All of a sudden, they could communicate. So we have to realize that communication is so new. And so smartphones, more and more people are having smartphones. Here's some statistics that I have. In 2021, which is the most recent statistics that I have, in Africa, about 80% of residents had a mobile phone. About 44% of those were smartphone users. Comparatively, in the United States, about 97% of Americans, adults, would have a smartphone or a phone, and then about 85 to 87% of those would be smartphones. So if we did that statistics for computers, the African computers are like below 10%. So that technology, that infrastructure, we think computers and Chromebooks and laptops in low and middle income countries, it is mobile devices that are so important and often left out of the AI conversation at this point.
So on the rural side of US and Canada, because we've done work in Virginia, we had a contract where we had 73 of the 130 school districts that we worked with. And then up in BC, we worked with about 15 of the school systems. So some of them are rural as well. And I think of infrastructure, yes, out to the home, do they have access to the internet? I think of infrastructure as, do they have access to the tools? And then I also think of it as people. And what I've learned about rural is that in many rural districts, you'll meet someone who's very dedicated and wants to do all this, but not a lot of support, because in rural, you do 15 jobs, you don't do one, right? So what we have designed is where we think the infrastructure is bringing rural districts together in cohorts to do the work. And in many cases, we've also brought in like an urban and a suburban with them, so that they have that infrastructure continued after they do the initial work, and they have that, support from districts that do have a lot more, people capacity. So in rural America, I think what we need to also be thinking about is how are we bringing folks together in cohorts to do the work, so that they also have the infrastructure and support that they need to move forward and not create inequities again.
I think these are all really important, like talking points to get us all thinking, because there's so many layers that we still haven't figured out yet. But I think it's good to have all this in the conversation. To kind of wrap us up, I want to ask you both the same question. How important is it for classroom teachers to understand what's happening behind the scenes, the infrastructure of the AI tools they use, or is it more important to focus on pedagogy and outcomes? Adam, we'll start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I have an analogy for you. Like, I think when you get in your car and you turn the key in the ignition, you don't really care that it starts and what's going on to get you from point A to point B. You just care that you can get from point A to point B. And I think most teachers, they just want to know, when I turn it on and I ask it the question to do the thing, it does it. I think the focus just needs to be more on how are we using these things, to what Cami said earlier, to really be innovative and creative and curious, to push that learning model to places that we've been talking about forever, right? The idea of EQ is way more important now than IQ. And how are we really going to push the envelope on those things? So I don't think it's as important as, being able to use these things to do those innovative things.
Absolutely. I work in a small rural school district. And so as an instructional coach, I am the everything coach. I'm the literacy coach and the technology coach and all of those things. And face time with teachers for professional development, for professional learning is so incredibly limited. And so if I have to choose between, not that it's not good or valuable to teach them about the infrastructure and those back end pieces, if I have to choose between helping them become a good pedagogical user of AI and knowing what the infrastructure is like, it's like that car model. The pedagogy, the student facing piece, helping them use it safely and accurately and for, not just worksheets, that has to come above knowing what's under the hood, if I use Adam's analogy.
Well, thank you both for joining us on this journey into the world of AI in education. This podcast series has been brought to you by the Utah STEM Action Center and STEM Connector. If today's conversation sparked ideas, questions, or curiosity, we've got more for you. Head over to our podcast portal for extended learning at aistemcast.com.
You'll find curated resources, classroom-ready tools, and ways to dive deeper into each episode's topic. We're building a community of educators who are ready to explore what's possible with AI, and we'd love for you to be a part of it.
Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and don't be afraid to dive into something new.